right, we're going to go live with Brihat Samhita because now it's not the time to do anything else. And what we're going to do today is look at 3 chapters of Brihat Samhita. We'll pick up the pace a little bit. We're going to look at Saturn. We're going to look at Varahamihira's description of Saturn and what he calls the Ketus. That's the interesting thing. And Canopus, or Agastya. All right, so his chapter on Saturn is quite brief and fairly simple. It basically just says Saturn sucks. Saturn causes misery. Saturn indicates misery. That's basically what he says. And wherever Saturn is, that's where the misery goes. To whatever is symbolized by the thing that Saturn occupies, that's what is indicated to suffer. That's his basic paradigm. He doesn't have any exceptions to that in the whole chapter. And just like with every other thing in the book so far, he doesn't talk about the 12 zodiac signs. He talks about Saturn in nakshatras. There is one thing which is interesting, though, in the first 1 or 2 slokas of his chapter. He says that the severity of Saturn's indication is different. And to my mind, it means based on the northern and southern declination of Saturn. And he breaks it into 3 categories. It could be not bad. It can be mixed. It can be pretty good. It can be mixed, or it can be bad, depending on if Saturn is north declination, middle declination, or southern declination, respectively. Okay, so when Saturn is in southern declination, it's the worst. Saturn is in southern declination right now. It's at fairly extreme southern declination along with Jupiter. And the sun is still pretty close to its southernmost. That's all he says. Just want to point out an interesting way that he says southern, northern, and middle declinations by referring to Yogatar stars, nakshatra, primary stars of nakshatras, which are either north, middle, or south. All right. That's all he says about Saturn. Very simple stuff. Next chapter, which is chapter 11, he's got a more interesting topic to me. I mean, that's basic. Everybody knows that about Saturn. In fact, it's so basic people are afraid to embrace it. On the 11th chapter, he's going to talk about Ketu. Now, everybody thinks Ketu is the south node of the moon. And that's how we refer to Ketu right now. But that's how we basically exclusively refer to Ketu right now. But in the times of Varahamihira, Ketu was thought to be the comets. And Rahu is thought to be the eclipses. So it was comets and eclipses. Was Rahu and Ketu and Rahu. Now we have Ketu's south node and Rahu's north node. Fine, I'm not suggesting a revolution in our nomenclature, but I'm just saying this is why the chapter discusses what the comets, although it's called the chapter on Ketu, and this is why he says there's many Ketus. He's not the only one who talks about comets. That's the point that he makes in his first text. Comets were an important part of astrology. The thing about comets is that he says this at some place in the beginning of the chapter. He says comets are not calculable. You don't know when they're going to appear. And this is probably why they've fallen out of use in modern astrology, because nobody goes outside and observes stars anymore. Which is also why we can't figure out this sidereal tropical thing very easily. And everybody does, including myself, everybody does astrology by looking at computer calculations of positions of things. And therefore, we don't know where the comets are. But perhaps we should adjust a bit, because obviously comets were extremely important to classic age astrology and ancient astrology. Because Gargamuni, Parashara, Sita, Devala, and many others, in the words of Varahamihira, discuss comets extensively. All right, so basically, yeah, he says in this statement number 2 that you can't calculate these. So we tend to think that when a comet or a Ketu appears, it's a horrible thing. Just like we tend to think when there's an eclipse, it's a horrible thing. But we read in the chapter on Rahu, or eclipses, that it's not always bad. Sometimes it indicates good things. And similarly, the Ketus or the comets, they're not always bad. In fact, his basic paradigm is when a comet, and it's a simple paradigm, it's the same paradigm for how you interpret any kind of omen in general. When something looks the way it's supposed to look, the way it looks when it's in its healthy, normal, natural form, then it means things are good. And when something doesn't look the way it's supposed to look, then it's bad. That's the basic paradigm. So with comets, he says, he says, this is very interesting. Okay, hang on, sorry, I got distracted. But on the point, the way they're supposed to look, he says if they look clear, let me find this stanza. If it's small, clear, shiny, and the important thing, or the easy thing to see, is if its tail is straight, and if it moves in a straight line, and if the tail is not delayed in being seen, if the tail is immediately visible, then that's called a good comet. That's what a comet's supposed to look like. And if you get a comet looking like what it's supposed to look like, then Varahamihira says the prediction is you get health and happiness in the land, indicated from this comet. If you got anything that's not in that category, and the most obvious of this is going to be a weird tail on the comet, a tail that's crooked, or multiple tails, or a tail that has weird colors, then that's a evil comet. It's a bad comet. And that portends ill health and unhappiness. Then the rest of your work for interpreting more details than that is the direction in which the comet is seen, the area or thing to which the tail points indicates what benefits from the comet. So even when there's a bad thing, sometimes somebody will benefit from the bad thing. So the direction the tail points of the comet indicates, even if it's a bad one, indicates who's going to benefit from it. And the direction that it flows to, if it's a bad comet, indicates the person that's going to suffer from it. He also has an interesting thing about comets, is that he says that there are 3 types. There's not just comets in the sky. He says there's also comets or Ketus that are, there's, first of all, the comets are the normal ones like Halley's Comet. Those kind of Ketus are the ones in deep space. Then there's comets in the sky. And then he says there's comets on earthly objects as well. He says because anything that has some brightness to it but isn't fire is considered a Ketu. So you could see, but he says excluding excluding gems and those, what do you call those, torch bugs and things like that, excluding those things, regular natural things that you see all the time. Unexpected appearances of light are called comets. And then I'll just tell you a couple of interesting ones. Then he goes through, for the chapter, he goes through specific comets, specific shapes, and all that stuff. You can study directly. You don't need me to give you an overview on this. Hey, Fernando, thank you. Yogi Raj. Yogi Raj. So it's been so long. David Palmer. Mark Twain was born and died during Halley's Comet. Interesting. The Ketus. Okay, hang on. Let me find. There's one really interesting one. He says there's one called the Brahmanda, I think. Brahmadanda. So you know what that means. That's the of Brahma, the whip, the stick of Brahma. So this comet is supposed to have 3 tails, and each tail is a different color. So if you ever see a comet with 3 tails, where each tail is a different color, you know that it's the end of the world, because that's a Brahmadanda comet. Usman says, when Ketu is comets, how come it's mokshakarka? Don't mix it up. Our modern nomenclature for Ketu means the south node. Varahamihira's nomenclature for Ketu is not the south node, it's comets. Okay, so the comets are not mokshakarkas, the south node is the mokshakarka. So I thought that was the cool one. All right, then that's what I want to tell you about the comets chapter. He does mention specific ones. And so if you're an astronomer, you would find this an interesting record of the comets that people in the 6th century India were aware of. Like, for example, he's got, after touching, this is one is called the Chal Ketu. It appears in the west with a tail that's an inch in length, pointing to the south as it proceeds more and more to the north. The tail increases in length. It gets to Ursa Major, then it gets to the pole star, which is Abhijit, and then it turns back after traveling one half of the sky, disappears in the south. So you could figure out, if you were an astronomer, what that comet is, what our modern name for it is. So that might be interesting to see which comets they were aware of. Now, I want to get to the next chapter, or take you to the next group of chapters. Next group of chapters is also interesting. So now he's discussed, so far in the book, he gave an introduction to how he's going to present the book and what the book is. He's going to present the book according to the ancient systems. And the book is a samhita, or a collection of ancillary details about astrology. It's not the Jataka, or like the essential horoscopic astrology. And then he gives qualifications of the astrologer in the 2nd chapter, and how important astrologers are, qualified astrologers. Then in the 3rd chapter, he begins discussing astrological stuff. And I believe he started with Rahus. He started with eclipses, if I remember right. And then the 4th chapter on it was Sun. Then he went to Mars, and he covered the planets. Got up to Saturn, in which we started covering today, and then he talked about Ketus, or the comets. Now he's done with that section where he talks about planetary type things, and he's going to talk about stars now, specific fixed stars. And the first one he's going to talk about is in India, called Agastya, which is Canopus. Now, this is the southern pole star of the Surya Samhita, Surya Siddhanta. It's the southern pole star. So it's a very important star. Now, how is he going to talk about stars? What do stars do in astrology? What he's going to talk about, and I've only prepared this particular chapter, but I bet it's going to follow the same pattern for all the chapters coming forward, is he's going to talk about heliacal rising, which means when the star... Remember when he was talking about retrogressions? He talked about Mars retrogressions and Mercury retrogressions especially, and the calculation of the effect of the regression was always based on its distance from the sun's emerging from the planet emerging from the sun's conjunction. How far is it from where it emerged from the sun's conjunction? And that's how you predict the nature of the retrogression. So it's the same thing now with a star. A star also disappears into the sun and then reappears from the sun. So that's how he's going to talk about it. Where is the sun when that happens, etc. This chapter, actually, ironically, for some reason, this chapter on Agastya star, or Canopus, is the most beautiful chapter so far in the book by far. So either the author, like most poetically beautiful, either the author is some kind of follower of Agastya Muni, or is just completely in love with Canopus, or is just taken by some of these stories. Whatever, the author really, really waxes poetic on this. So just for fun, I'll give you a little taste of how all of a sudden, how picturesque and descriptive he becomes. And he starts to use poetic devices in the Sanskrit, like double entendre and stuff. So he starts to tell the story of Agastya. The thing about Agastya, I actually don't know the story myself. I don't know the details. He did something with the mountains. So to do this, whatever he needed to do with the mountains, he swallowed an ocean. So the first 5 verses describe the ocean when it was exposed, describe the ocean floor when it was exposed, how beautiful it was. It's so interesting. He says, the mighty ocean, whose waters were swallowed by Agastya, when the waters were swallowed, you could see all the gems. And the gems were more beautiful than the crowns of the gods. And then there were hills underneath the sea, full of corals and gems. And there were like snakes coming out of the rocks that were glistening. And there was trees. And then you could see all the fish moving around on this totally very shallow water. And it was amazing. So that's just his like little glorification of Agastya. And then he says, this is actually, there's something interesting in this chapter about Ayanamsha or tropical or sidereal things, just something interesting here. But basically what it says is it's very good. This star is very, very auspicious. So the basic nature is that, I mean, you could just summarize this very shortly. When the star Canopus rises and can be seen, when it comes out of the sun, glare, then it's very positive for mankind. Things are very good, and it's especially good for water. Water becomes clear, water becomes sweet, the impurity in water is removed. Now, modern people don't really know what this means, but in the old days, you had to search for drinkable water. It wasn't so easy. A lot of water is too stagnant, or might have some toxicity to it. It can have a lot of bacteria, disease in it. it's hard to find drinkable water. And then sometimes it's easier than others. And when Canopus comes out, then Agastya Muni has come out, who has purified the ocean. So the symbolism of this star rising now, somebody that's really an astronomer could correct me about what he's talking about with the rising. That could be interesting. But when the star rises, heliacal, the translator says, here now the effects of the heliacal rising of Canopus. Okay, and then he still gets more, there's more picturesque stuff. You want to hear it? Here now the effects of the heliacal rising of Canopus, a star sacred to Agastya, who suppressed the Vindhya mountains, whose soaring heights obstructed the course of the sun. To those soaring heights, the beautiful clothes of the Vidyadhara ladies, who flew aloft into the sky towards the tops of the mountains, making their clothes into flags for on the mountain. The caves are the abodes of lions who have drunk the blood of elephants, and the smell of the blood attracts the black bees to come around their mouth like beards. And then the rivers come out of the caves. Summits score the starry vault whose rocks were full of buzzing bees. I don't know why he's so into this. Anyway, that's that. And conversely, the disappearance of Canopus is inauspicious. So basically, his paradigm is basically you have some stars that are auspicious, some that are inauspicious. When the auspicious stars appear or rise, it's good. And when they disappear, it's bad. And conversely, when the inauspicious ones appear, it's bad. And when they disappear, it's good. There's one interesting point tucked away in here. Let me put on my glasses to make it easier. He says, yeah, this was attended by a footnote. Yeah. The time of reappearance of the star is different in different places, and it is for the learned astronomer to ascertain the times for these given places. In the town of Ujjain, the star reappears when the sun just begins to enter. Now, the translation says the 24th degree of the sign Leo, but the actual text says the end of... No, what does the actual text say? The actual text says Kanya, which is Virgo. So that's rather suspicious, isn't it? Now, why is that suspicious? Which direction does the Ainamsha go? That's just weird that the translator puts it as... And he says that the commentator has corrected Varahamihira. So there's some weird stuff going on here, which may have some relation to tropical sidereal stuff for people that want to research this more. All right, so there you go. That's our survey of these 3 chapters of Brihat Samhita. Saturn basically is bad news. Whatever nakshatra it occupies, the things signified by that nakshatra suffer. However, consider the declination. If this declination of Saturn is northern, it's not actually going to be suffering. It's going to be okay. If it's middle declination, then it's going to be mixed bag of suffering and okay. And if it's southern declination, as Saturn is currently and has been for months, then it's just plain old suffering. Then he talked about the Ketus, and basically his message about the Ketus was if a comet or unusual luminous appearance looks good, then it's good. And if it looks bad, then it's bad. And the way it looks good is if it looks the way it's supposed to look, which for a comet means nice and white and steadily bright, moving steadily, and having a tail that is straight and white and appears immediately. If it's other than that, then the comet is not good. And he mentions the end of the world comet, which is 3 tails, 3 different colors. Then he goes and begins talking about stars and their heliacal risings. And the basic paradigm there is there's some stars that are good, and when they rise, that's good. And there's some stars that are bad, and when they rise, that's bad. And then the particular nature of that star indicates what it particularly is good for. Agastya star, since Agastya purifies the waters, when it appears, it's good for water. And when it disappears, it's not good. Okay, guys. Now, if you want to hear Bhagavatam, then stick around. I'll start a new stream on that. And if you're on Facebook, then go over to the Vraj Kishore page. Because we'll flip over to Vraj Kishore's page to do that one.